Senator Peter Welch press Attorney General Pam Bondi on healthcare risks, government shutdown fallout, and the real-world consequences for American families. The exchange then turns to voting rights, where Welch demands factual justification for federal power and challenges whether enforcement is driven by evidence or ideology.
I have noticed that at various times when one of my colleagues is pressing you, you come up with something in their background. So I'll be waiting for my turn, but you don't have to do it right now. So let me get to my questions. One of the things that you mentioned, and I agree with this, that it's really tough on the various federal and federal workforce, including our law enforcement folks, who are not getting paid because of the shutdown.
Mhm.
I agree with that. But I also think that wasn't the whole story. There is an issue here that's going to affect Americans, whether they voted for President Trump or voted for Vice President Harris, and that is the loss of health care, where on November 1st, everyone who is getting Affordable Care Act help to buy insurance is going to get the notice of premium increases. And I got a letter just today from a Vermont family, nuclear family of 5, husband and wife, 54 and 55, with 3 kids, one of whom has acute myeloid leukemia. And the apprehension that they have is that if we don't solve this problem, and November 1 is a urgent date, then their family premiums will triple. It'll be beyond their ability to pay. So I'm assuming that with respect to the threat to healthcare for families in your state of Florida, in my state of Vermont, you would share that concern and hope that we would resolve that.
Senator Welsh, I would be happy to speak with that family too, because there are many nonprofits that help with children with terminal illnesses, and I'm involved in some in Florida. So we would be happy to talk to you about that. As to healthcare,
Well-
the government is shut down. It's my understanding, maybe you're not one of them, but because many Democrats want healthcare for illegal aliens, and that's what shut down
But
the government.
let me
That's
be
one of the
clear.
sticking points, and I don't know if you voted
All right. Well,
for that or not.
this actually is important to all of us. And the lament I have is that if this healthcare goes away, this premium support, it is really going to hurt families in red states and blue states. And in Vermont, I mean, we voted Democratic, but we have a lot of good folks who voted for President Trump, and their health care is jeopardized. And there's a November 1 deadline that is coming up. And the reason I'm saying this is that I think it's important for us to try to work out together a resolution that's going to be beneficial to people you care about in Florida and voted for President Trump, and keep people I care about in Vermont who voted in some cases for Vice President Harris and some for President Trump. So it's not just Democrats not wanting to negotiate. And in fact, we do want to negotiate. And that's why I'd encourage the president to encourage my colleagues on the Republican side to sit down with us and try to see if we can make some progress. Another topic, with the respective voting rights in the letter that your voting rights chief sent out, we got one in Vermont, and it's a demand to get all the information on the voting file. And in that letter, in the announcement of that letter, the chief indicated an apprehension about the voting process being taken over by, quote, the left. Now, do you have any information with respect to Vermont about a takeover of the voting process by, quote, the left?
Senator, I'm not familiar with what you're referring to. We are currently involved in voter roll lawsuits in 6 states. Is that what you're referring to?
No, there's a letter that went out demanding that states, including Vermont, provide all the voting file information,
Right.
includes personal information. But when that letter was sent out,
That's perfectly legal.
but there was an assertion by the chief in this division that this was to deal with the fact that the voting process has been taken over by the left. So we got one of those letters in Vermont. And my question to you is, what do you mean by the left? And do you have any evidence that the so-called system has been overtaken by the left?
We must have fair and free elections.
No, I know that, but I'm asking for the specific basis.
And we will have fair and free elections in this country.
Okay, let me.
Senator, I'd be happy to talk to my chief. Who was it? Who said that?
It was your chief, which I assume you would know who that is. Here's the question here, okay? There is a point of view that is in dispute here about the fairness of elections. But you have the power as the as the Attorney General to use the authority of your office to make demands on states. And you did that with Vermont. That's within your right to do it. I'm not disputing your legal authority to do it.
Is Vermont disputing turning over the information to our office?
Vermont is, the Secretary of State is. And you can resolve that with her. But
and we have every right to have that information.
Yeah, here's
Senator.
where I'm going.
Why wouldn't they want to turn it
You're
over?
a prosecutor with the awesome authority to make the decision that you're going to start an investigation against the state or against an individual. And I know from your experience as a county prosecutor and as the Attorney General in Florida, you took seriously that factual basis before you'd proceed, right?
Senator, I take that role, I take my oath very seriously.
All right, so what I'm
and
asking,
I take fair and free elections in this country very seriously. And that information, our office is entitled to have that information. And we are involved in litigation on that. And I assume we'll be involved in litigation with Vermont.
We have a Republican governor in Vermont. We had our former Republican governor was secretary, was the treasurer for many years, and also the Secretary of State with election responsibility. What I'm asking is, do you or does your head of this voting section have any factual basis that you can point to that justifies your demand that Vermont turn over all this confidential voting rights information?
Well, it would remain confidential with my office. And you just said that you have a Republican governor, so it doesn't make sense what you just said.
This exchange between Senator Peter Welch and Attorney General Pam Bondi unfolds as a study in contrast between a lawmaker insisting on consequences and an executive official emphasizing authority. It is not loud or theatrical, but it is deeply consequential, because it exposes how differently each side understands responsibility when government power directly affects people's lives. Welch opens by signaling restraint and awareness. His brief remark about colleagues pressing Bondi and her tendency to reference their backgrounds is not a jab so much as a boundary-setting moment. He is making clear that he intends to focus on substance, not personal sparring. That framing matters, because what follows is not a partisan attack, but a sustained attempt to pull the conversation back to real-world harm. When Welch turns to the government shutdown in healthcare, he deliberately broadens the lens. He agrees with Bondi that shutdowns hurt federal workers, including law enforcement, but he insists that this is not the whole story. The real crisis, he argues, is what happens to families who rely on Affordable Care Act premium assistance. By citing a specific Vermont family, with parents in their mid-50s, 3 children, and 1 child battling acute myeloid leukemia, Welch grounds the debate in lived experience. This is not rhetorical flourish. It is a reminder that policy deadlines translate into human suffering. November 1st is not a negotiation tactic. It is the date when people will be told they cannot afford their health insurance. Welch's framing is intentionally bipartisan. He repeatedly emphasizes that the fallout will hit people regardless of how they voted. Trump voters in Vermont, Harris voters in Florida, none are insulated from premium hikes. His appeal is not ideological, it is civic. He is asking whether there is room for collaboration to prevent harm, and whether governing still means problem-solving across lines of disagreement. The exchange becomes more consequential when Welch turns to voting rights. Here, his approach is meticulous. He acknowledges the legal authority of the Justice Department outright and does not dispute its right to request voter data. Instead, he zeroes in on the rationale behind that power. Welch references a letter sent to Vermont demanding comprehensive voting file information, including personal data, accompanied by assertions that the voting process has been taken over by the left. His question is precise. What does that mean, and what evidence supports it? Bondi does not provide a direct answer. She responds with general statements about fair and free elections and mentions voter roll lawsuits in other states. Welch presses again, clarifying that his concern is not legality, but justification. When a prosecutor demands sensitive information from a state and frames that demand in ideological terms, the burden is on the prosecutor to show factual grounding. This is where Welch's background as a lawyer becomes evident. He is not disputing authority, he is interrogating discretion. Welch's reminder of Bondi's own prosecutorial experience is one of the most telling moments in the exchange. He notes that prosecutors do not proceed lightly and that they take seriously the factual basis for action before invoking the power of the state. This is not an accusation, it is an ethical mirror. The question is not who governs Vermont, but whether federal enforcement is being driven by evidence rather than ideology. Taken as a whole, this is not a clash of personalities, but of governing philosophies. Welch is arguing that power must be exercised with humility, transparency, and an awareness of downstream harm. Bondi is asserting that authority, once granted, does not require public justification beyond legality. For viewers, the implications are serious. Healthcare access and voting rights are areas where government action, or refusal to explain it, reshapes lives and democratic trust. In the end, Welch is not asking for a political concession. He is asking for assurance that decisions affecting families' healthcare and citizens' voting data are grounded in facts rather than narratives. That unresolved tension is what gives this exchange its lasting weight.